In 1947, there is a car company in Germany whose entire business plan is one sentence long. Get the old man out of prison. That's it. That's the strategy. No product line, no factory worth the name, no cars bearing the family name, not one, not yet. The founder is sitting in a French cell, charged with war crimes, his health collapsing by the month. And his son has exactly one asset in the world: the ability to design a race car. So that's what he does. He takes a contract from an Italian manufacturer, builds them a Grand Prix machine so advanced it makes engineers stare, collects the fee, and uses the money to buy his father's freedom. 22 months. That's how long Ferdinand Porsche spent behind bars before the check cleared. The car he built to pay for it never raced, not once. It was too expensive, the rules changed, and it sat there, the most important vehicle in the company's history precisely because of what it purchased instead of what it won. Now here's the part that makes this story different from every other corporate comeback you've heard. The father in that cell wasn't a fraudster. He wasn't a con man. He was, by a wide margin, one of the greatest engineers who ever lived. He built the world's first gasoline-electric hybrid in 1900, a full century before anyone put the word hybrid on a bumper. He designed the fastest sports cars of the 1920s, and he designed a small, round, air-cooled car for ordinary families that would go on to become one of the most recognized objects on planet Earth. He also designed it on a direct commission from Adolf Hitler. And that is the knot at the center of this entire story. One man, one drafting table, and a career where the same relentless engineering brilliance produced both the people's car and the war machine, where the thing that made him great is inseparable from the thing that put him in that cell. So how does a blacksmith's son from a village that doesn't exist on modern maps end up designing for the Third Reich? How does his family lose the company twice and get it back? And how does a brand built entirely on the idea that a car should be small, light, and fast end up saving itself, decades later, by building the exact opposite? Let's open the file. September 1875, a village in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in territory that today sits inside the Czech Republic. Ferdinand Porsche is born into a world where the automobile does not meaningfully exist. Transportation means carriages, trains, and bicycles. His father runs a blacksmithing business, and in that time and place, that settles the question of what Ferdinand will do with his life. The trade passes down. That's the deal. Ferdinand hates it. He isn't interested in the family workshop. He focuses on school, hoping to find his career somewhere else entirely. And then, at 14, the door closes. His older brother dies. Ferdinand is now the eldest son, which means he is now the heir to the anvil. He drops out of school and goes to work full-time in his father's shop, doing a job he never wanted. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the hinge the entire story turns on. A 14-year-old kid loses his brother and his future in the same year, and the adult world tells him, "This is your life now. Get to work." But there's something else in that house, up in the attic: electricity. This is the late 19th century. Candles and gas lamps are still normal. The electric light bulb is a rumor that's slowly becoming a fact. And Ferdinand becomes completely, obsessively fixated on it, running circuits in the attic, teaching himself a science almost nobody in his village understands. His father's reaction is exactly what you'd expect from a man who needs his son at the forge. "Stop busying yourself with nonsense. Come downstairs. There's work." And then something happens that I think deserves a lot more credit than it usually gets in this story. The father watches his son long enough to realize he's wrong. He enrolls Ferdinand at the Imperial Technical School in Reichenberg, Within months, Ferdinand builds his own electric generator and wires the family home with light bulbs. Not as a school project, as a demonstration. The blacksmith walks into his own house and finds it lit by his son. At that point, the argument is over. The father lets him go. Neither of them has the faintest idea what that permission just unlocked. 1893. Ferdinand is 18 years old, and he leaves home for Vienna. He lands at Bela Egger and Company, a manufacturer of electrical machinery, and he rises through that company fast enough that within a few years, he's the one in charge. While he's there, he builds the company's first electric wheel hub motor. A motor that attaches directly to a wheel and drives it. No transmission, no chain, no drivetrain in between. At the time, the obvious application is bicycles. Ferdinand is thinking about something bigger, because the first automobiles are appearing around the region, and they generate the kind of excitement that makes engineers quit stable jobs. After 5 years, that's exactly what he does. He leaves for Jacob Lohner and Company, a carriage builder that has just stopped building carriages to chase self-powered vehicles instead. And there, at 23 years old, Ferdinand Porsche builds his first automobile, the Porsche P1. It is fully electric. It is built on a wooden carriage body. It has a range of roughly 49 miles and a top speed of 21 miles per hour. And it is hauling around lead-acid batteries that weigh a fortune. Here's the context most people miss. Cars in 1898 are not transportation. Nobody is commuting. Automobiles are competition machines, built to be raced and tested across Europe and America, the way experimental aircraft were flown in the 1940s. You built a car to prove something. So Ferdinand keeps refining, and in 1900 he does something genuinely extraordinary. He adds an internal combustion engine, not to drive the wheels, but to power the electric motors that drive the wheels. The Lohner Porsche Electromobile, the world's first gasoline-electric hybrid, in 1900. It wins motorsport events. It breaks several Austrian speed records. It hits 36 miles per hour, which in that era is genuinely fast. And it is a mechanical work of art that is decades, arguably a full century, ahead of the world it was born into. It also demonstrates precisely why electric cars would go on to fail for the next 100 years. The thing weighs almost 2 tons. The range is short. The batteries are brutal. And the lesson the industry takes from Ferdinand Porsche's masterpiece is, don't do that again. He'd solved a problem nobody had yet, using a technology that wasn't ready for a market that didn't exist. That's not a failure. That's just being early, which in business is frequently the same thing. So he does what brilliant early people do. He adapts. The partnership with Lohner ends. Austro-Daimler, the leader in modern combustion engines, hires him as chief designer. And in 1908, he produces his first pure gasoline automobile, the Austro-Daimler Maya. Then comes the break. He develops the Austro-Daimler Model 27/80, 85 horsepower, a top speed of 85 miles per hour, purpose-built for the Prince Henry trial in 1910. It takes first place, and second, and third. A clean sweep of the podium in the biggest event of the era. The young mechanic becomes a national name, and the company makes him a professor. Then, in 1914, the world sets itself on fire. When the First World War breaks out, every factory in Europe converts. Austro-Daimler starts pouring machinery into the Austro-Hungarian army, and Ferdinand Porsche gets pulled directly into it. He designs military aircraft and airship engines. He designs artillery tractors, including the M17 Goliath. And he does it well enough that by the end of the war, his reputation isn't just great car designer. It's one of the best engineers alive in any category. Remember this, because it matters enormously in about 25 years. The First War is where the world learns that Ferdinand Porsche can build weapons. But 1918 arrives, the guns stop, and he goes back to what he actually loves: racing. By 1922, he rolls out the Austro-Daimler Sascha, built on a theory that runs directly against the conventional wisdom of the time. Make the car smaller than the competition, and it will beat cars with far bigger engines. The Sascha wins 43 out of 53 races, including the Targa Florio in 1922. 43 out of 53. That's not a good season. That's a rewriting of what people thought the rules were. The following year, Porsche moves to Stuttgart and becomes technical director and chief engineer at Daimler, which soon merges with Benz to become Daimler-Benz. And this is where he builds the cars that made his name immortal among people who care about such things. The Mercedes-Benz S-Series. High-performance machines that work on the road and on the track, which more or less invents the modern sports car as a category. And then, in 1928, the SSK, the Supersport Kurz. 7.1 liters, 6 cylinders, between 200 and 300 horsepower. The slowest version tops out around 190 kilometers per hour. The 300 horsepower version will do 235. In 1928. On the tires and brakes of 1928, it takes the 500 miles of Argentina in 1929. The Cordoba Grand Prix in 1929, and again in 1930. The Irish Grand Prix in 1930. It keeps winning until it peaks with a first-place finish at the Mille Miglia in 1931. For a stretch of years, the SSK is simply the best, fastest, most valuable sports car in the world, and the sleeker Trossi Roadster version turns it into a genuine object of desire. Ferdinand Porsche is now, unambiguously, at the summit of his profession. So naturally, he quits. He's grown tired of fighting the Mercedes-Benz board over creative direction, so he walks to another manufacturer, which promptly collapses under the weight of the Great Depression. And that is how one of the greatest automotive engineers on Earth ends up unemployed in the worst economy of the 20th century. His response is either the bravest or the most stubborn decision of his career, and honestly, I think it's both. In the middle of a global depression, he founds his own company, Porsche GmbH. He brings in his old associates, and he brings in his son, Ferry, a young man who inherited his father's instincts and who is working every hour he can to prove himself to the most demanding engineer in Germany. There's just one problem with the new company. Nobody is hiring. The plan is consulting and engine development work for other manufacturers, but the country is still gutted from the last war, and public demand for automobiles is close to non-existent. The most famous engineer in Germany is sitting in an office waiting for a phone that doesn't ring. Then a letter arrives. In 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, and one of his personal fixations is automobiles. He convenes the best car engineers in the country, Porsche among them, and lays out a specification. He wants a car every German family can own. It has to seat 5. It has to be fuel efficient. And it has to be cheap. Specifically, 990 Reichsmarks. The engineers in that room consider that number impossible. Not difficult. Impossible. He calls it the Volkswagen, the people's car. Porsche submit to design, and Porsche wins. And I want to be very precise about what this partnership actually was, because it gets flattened in both directions constantly. This was not ideological communion. It was a transaction that suited both men perfectly. Hitler wanted a creative mind capable of delivering a car that shouldn't exist. Porsche wanted political backing so total that he would never have to think about money or financing again. Each man got exactly what he wanted. That's what makes it so uncomfortable. In 1934, Porsche and his team begin work on the Volkswagen Type 1,
the car the world would later nickname the Beetle for the obvious reason. And as a piece of engineering, it's beautiful. 2 doors.
An air-cooled engine mounted in the rear, which means minimal maintenance and, thanks to the weight distribution, notably easier steering. Fuel economy of 31.4 miles per gallon, a number that is still respectable today, 90 years and roughly 1,000 technological revolutions later. 300,000 orders are placed. 300,000. Before ordinary Germans have one in their driveway, it is, by an enormous margin, the biggest thing Ferdinand Porsche has ever done, and he's now ready to watch the factory bring it to life. The factory never gets the chance. September 1939, Germany invades Poland. Britain and France declare war, and general production of the Beetle stops before it truly starts, because the Volkswagen plant has a new priority: the war. Ferdinand Porsche is one of the best engineers in the country, and a personal favorite of the man running it. There was never a version of this where he stayed out of it. He develops off-road military vehicles and battle machinery. The Schwimmwagen, the amphibious military derivative of the Beetle, the Elephant tank destroyer, the V-1 flying bomb. But the tanks are where his brilliance turns on him. Hitler runs a contest to determine who gets the contract to mass-produce the Tiger, the heavy tank meant to dominate the battlefield. Porsche's entry is called the Ferdinand, and it is exactly what you'd expect from the man who built a hybrid in 1900. A tank running petrol-electric transmission. Revolutionary. Genuinely, structurally clever. It is also grotesquely over-engineered, which means the engines are far too complicated, which means it breaks down during trials. He loses to Henschel and Son. And here we arrive at a detail that tells you something about how confident this man was. Before he had even submitted his prototype, before the contest was decided, Porsche had already built 100 chassis. 100. On spec, for a contract he hadn't won. To salvage something from that, the Germans convert 90 of the Ferdinand hulls into tank destroyers, renamed the Elephant. On paper, they're devastating. In practice, the engine problems and the mobility issues follow them onto the battlefield, and most of them break down and are lost. Now I have to tell you the part of this story that the company itself spent decades denying. The Porsche company used slave laborers at its Stuttgart facility. For years, the company's position was that it had been a small office during the war, and the accusations didn't apply to it. That position collapsed in the late 20th century, when dozens of people came forward and described their capture and the conditions of their forced labor at Porsche's plants. Accounts that named what happened to them, and to dozens, possibly hundreds of others. The company eventually admitted it, and has since paid millions of euros into funds and compensation for victims of forced labor. This was common practice in German factories with large workforces. Prisoners of war and others were paid almost nothing, or nothing at all, and were frequently worked to death. That it was common is an explanation. It is not a defense. Every one of those factories was run by people who made a choice, and the fact that they all made the same one does not convert it into an accident. And that is exactly where the moral accounting on Ferdinand Porsche gets genuinely hard, because the record on his personal politics is more complicated than either his defenders or his critics want it to be. He was rarely known to give the Hitler salute. In parades full of brown uniforms, he stood out in a baggy gray coat. He received an SS rank from the party and simply ignored it. He does not appear to have believed in the ideology. He appears to have believed in the work. He wanted to grow his business and supply what the government needed, and he was apparently prepared to do that regardless of what else that government was doing. I've read a lot of stories about men who told themselves they were just the engineer. This one is the cleanest example I've ever found. And I don't think it's an excuse. I think it's the point. You don't have to believe in a regime to make yourself indispensable to it. The numbers are unambiguous about where that took him. In 1934, the Porsche company posted a profit of 3,000 Reichsmarks. By 1944, it was over 2 million. The bill for that came due in 1945. When the war ends, Ferdinand Porsche is arrested by the French government and imprisoned on war crimes charges on the basis of his SS membership and his relationship with Hitler. The greatest automotive engineer of his generation is in a cell. The company has no products, no factory of its own, and no future. Which brings us back to where we started, and to the son. Ferry Porsche inherited his father's love of machines and, more usefully, his father's talent. He had already built several vehicles by the end of the war, including the Schwimmwagen, literally swimming car, designed to operate on land and water and used extensively by German soldiers, which is why Ferry is arrested too and spends several months in jail alongside his father. And then the French do something that changes automotive history entirely by accident. They release Ferry, specifically so he can go and raise the money to bail his father out. Think about the position he's in. He's a young man with a famous surname that has become a liability, no company to speak of, and a deadline measured in his father's declining health. So he sells the only thing he has. He signs a contract with the Italian manufacturer, Cisitalia, and builds them the Cisitalia 360, an extraordinarily advanced Grand Prix car, far beyond what the era expected. The car never races. Cisitalia's finances buckle, the competition rules change, and the machine is stranded before it ever reaches a starting grid. But Ferry had already been paid. 22 months after he went in, Ferdinand Porsche walks out of French custody, and the conditions he was held in have wrecked him permanently. His health never recovers, and it troubles him for the rest of his life. He cannot go back to work, so the entire weight of the family name lands on Ferry. And what he does next is the moment Porsche stops being a consultancy and becomes a car company. He looks at Cisitalia, the firm he'd just built a car for, and notices they're producing small sports cars using Fiat engines. Why can't we do that with Volkswagen parts? He goes to the managing director of Volkswagen and negotiates a deal for access to VW's components and distribution network. Then, he produces documentation proving that the Beetle was developed by his father before the war, and gets Volkswagen to agree to pay Porsche a license fee on every single Beetle they build. Read that again. A royalty on every Beetle, forever. That is not an engineer's negotiation. That is a businessman's negotiation, and it's the moment Ferry Porsche stops being his father's son and starts being the reason there's a company at all. With parts, distribution, and recurring income, they can finally build something of their own. In 1948, the Porsche 356, a small two-door roadster with a Volkswagen air-cooled engine and a top speed of 87 miles per hour. It is not the most powerful car in the world. It isn't close. But Ferry keeps refining it, making it faster and smoother, and that same year he enters it at Innsbruck, Austria. It wins. Sales start slow, but the 356 is adored by exactly the people who matter, enthusiasts. Including one particular enthusiast, Ferdinand, watching his son debut a car carrying their name. In 1950, the old man visits the Volkswagen factory one final time and sees the Beetle he designed being built at scale, the way he always intended. He dies the following year, in 1951, at 75. He never gets to see what happens next. Almost immediately after Ferdinand's death, the 356 takes off, accelerated by a win at Le Mans in 1951. The Speedster and the Carrera follow, and the car becomes a fixture among serious drivers and celebrities. But there's a structural problem hiding under the success. The 356, for all its charm, is still fundamentally a variation on the Beetle, and customers are getting tired of looking at it. Porsche needs something entirely new that still reads instantly as Porsche, which is a brutal design brief. And it's solved by the next generation of the family. Ferdinand Alexander Porsche, Ferry's son, who considered himself less an engineer than a craftsman of shape. What he shapes is the 911. The 911 replaces the four-cylinder with a six-cylinder boxer engine, air-cooled, mounted in the rear, and that weight balance transforms the steering and the acceleration into something competitors simply could not replicate. But the statistic that stops me cold isn't about speed. It's this. It's estimated that over 70% of all 911s ever built are still on the road. 70%. Of a sports car, a category of vehicle that people historically buy to drive hard and then discard. Launched in September 1964, it becomes their bestseller, and Porsche does the obvious thing. Keeps giving people more of what they want, with the Carrera S and the Turbo pushing annual sales past 20,000 units by the 1970s. Then it goes racing, and it basically never stops. 5th place at the Monte Carlo Rally in 1965, then 3 consecutive Monte Carlo victories from 1968 to 1970, then the Targa Florio, the Paris-Dakar, the 24 Hours of Daytona, and a wall of rally and GT championships that make it one of the most successful competition cars in history. Around this time, Ferry steps down. None of his sons want his job, so the family council splits the company's shares and hands control to someone outside the bloodline, and the family's involvement in the company effectively ends. And then, in 1986, the floor gives way. A sharp drop in the dollar exchange rate collides with the cost of building cars to Porsche's standards. By 1991, sales have fallen to 23,000 units, half of what they'd sold 5 years earlier. Losses hit 240 million Deutsche Marks. By the end of 1993, they're scraping by at around 14,000 cars a year. That's not a downturn. That's a company doing math about how many months it has left. So they make the most controversial announcement in their history. Porsche is going to build an SUV. The backlash is immediate and, let's be fair, completely predictable. This is a company whose entire identity is high-performance machines that work equally well on a road and a racetrack. A family-friendly SUV isn't a new product. It's a contradiction. It would also be the first Porsche in history with 4 doors. But the market data was screaming. In 1999, SUVs outsold regular passenger cars in America for the first time. The Cayenne arrives in 2002. It becomes not only their bestseller, but a genuine fan favorite. Because the thing shares a body style with a minivan's cousin, but drives like a Porsche, with the performance and reliability the badge promises, and an interior people actually want to sit in. The Cayenne saved the company from bankruptcy. Today, the Cayenne and the more recent Macan account for over 70% of Porsche's sales in America, and there's a real argument that they're the sportiest SUVs anyone makes. The sports cars never went away. The Panamera and the fully electric Taycan are among their best sellers now, and there's a quiet irony there worth noting. The company founded by the man whose electric car was too heavy and too short-legged in 1900 now sells an electric car that works. Porsche is owned today by the Volkswagen Group, the company built around the car Ferdinand designed, that his son extracted royalties from, that funded the first car to ever wear their name. The circle closed. It just took about 70 years and a prison sentence. Here's what I keep coming back to. We tell the story of great engineers as though talent is a moral quality, as though being brilliant at building things makes you a good person by default. Ferdinand Porsche's life is the cleanest argument I've ever found that it doesn't. The same mind that produced the people's car produced the tank destroyer. The same refusal to compromise that made the SSK the fastest car on Earth made the Ferdinand tank too complicated to survive its own trials. And the same total focus on the work, always the work, regardless of who was signing the check, is what built the company and what put him in that cell. His son understood something he never did, that a business isn't only an engineering problem. Ferry Porsche's greatest design wasn't a car. It was a licensing agreement. If there's one decision in this story you can't get out of your head, put it in the comments. I want to know whether it's the 990 Reichsmark spec, the 100 chassis built for a contract he hadn't won, or the Grand Prix car built purely to buy a man out of prison. I read all of them, and I promise you're not the only one stuck on it. And if you want more files like this one, the stories where the engineering is spectacular and the ethics are anything but, subscribe. New video every Friday. Next week, we're opening a file on a company that built its entire fortune on a product its own executives knew was killing people, and kept the receipts.